The morning air in Portland's Pearl District carried the sharp tang of blooming cherry blossoms and the faint hum of a city waking up. It was just past 6:30 a.m., and the streets were already alive with the rhythm of early commuters, bicycles whirring past, the soft clatter of coffee shop shutters rolling open, and the distant wail of a train slicing through the spring mist. Tucked at the corner of Northwest 10th and Everett, a food truck painted in soft blues and silvers gleamed under the rising sun like a moonbeam caught on wheels. Moonlit morsels. The chalkboard sign read, its handwritten menu, smudged from the morning's first rush, offering cedar-smoked salmon bagels, Marionberry scones, and a Portland sunrise breakfast bowl that promised quinoa kale and a poached egg drizzled with hazelnut aioli. The truck was Emma Larson's world, her anchor, her rebellion against a life that had tried to break her. At 27, she moved with the kind of quiet grit that came from carrying more than her share of burdens. Her auburn hair tied back in a loose braid, a faded denim apron stained with coffee and blackberry jam hugging her frame. Her hazel eyes, sharp and warm, scanned the growing line of regulars baristas on break. Construction workers, a few artists still bleary from late-night sketches, each one greeted with a nod or a quick smile that felt like it belonged to them alone. She flipped a scone on the griddle, the sizzle mixing with the low hum of a folk tune she sang under her breath, a habit she'd picked up from her mother, who'd taught her that food wasn't just sustenance, but a kind of love you could hold in your hands. Liam Carter stood at the back of the line, his charcoal wool coat unbuttoned, a plain white t-shirt beneath it, his dark hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it during a sleepless night. He was 32, but the weight of his life boardroom's stock tickers headlines, calling him the prodigy of Carter Tech, made him feel older, heavier, like he was carrying a city on his shoulders. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a cascade of emails from investors in Singapore, a text from his assistant about a delayed merger, but he silenced it without looking. Here in this line, he wasn't Liam Carter Forbes. 30 under 30, the man who'd turned a dorm room app into a tech empire. He was just a guy craving a coffee, a moment of anonymity in a world that rarely let him breathe. The line shuffled forward, and he watched Emma work her hands quick but deliberate, slicing a bagel, spooning aioli, handing a paper bag to a woman in a nurse's scrubs with a "see you tomorrow, Marla." There was something grounding about this corner, this truck, the way the air smelled of toasted bread and damp pavement. It reminded him of a place he hadn't thought about in years. A shelter in Eugene, a cold step. A girl with a box of broken cookies and a smile that made him believe he could be more than a kid with nothing. Emma's voice cut through the morning hum, clear and steady. "Morning, folks. Heads up, we're down to our last salmon bagel. One left, so make it quick." She stepped into view, wiping her hands on her apron, a faint smudge of flour on her cheek. Liam opened his mouth, ready to claim it, but she raised a hand, her gaze landing on the man behind him. "Hold on. I think Mr. Daniels was here first." She smiled, not overly sweet, just certain, like she was stating a fact, as plain as the sky. Liam turned, startled. Behind him stood an older man, maybe 70, with a faded army cap and a canvas bag slung over his shoulder, his hands trembling slightly as he leaned on a walker. The man blinked, surprised himself. "Me," he said, voice rough but warm. Emma leaned out the truck's window, her braid swinging forward. "Same as always, sir, extra cream cheese. No onion." The man's face softened, a grin breaking through. "You got it, Emma. Didn't think you'd notice an old guy like me." She laughed, already turning to prep the order. "Notice you, Mr. Daniels. I'd spot that cap from a mile away." The line didn't pause. It moved like it always did, fluid, unbothered, as if this was just how things worked here. Liam stayed where he was, caught off guard, but not angry. He couldn't remember the last time someone had looked past him, not his name, not his wealth, just him standing in line like anyone else. It was disorienting, but it felt good. He glanced at his watch, then back at the truck, where Emma was handing Mr. Daniels his bagel, her voice low and kind. "Take care, all right? And tell your grandson I've got a scone with his name on it next time he visits." Liam's lips twitched into a half-smile. "Well," he said mostly to himself, "that's fair." Emma caught it, her head tilting slightly as she wiped down the counter. "What's that?" she said, not turning fully, her tone matter-of-fact. "Fair's fair," Liam replied, stepping forward. "First come, first served right. Doesn't matter who's in line." She paused, glancing at him now, her hazel eyes meeting his for the first time. They were younger than he'd expected, bright but steady, like they'd seen enough to know when to trust and when to hold back. "Exactly," she said, a playful edge creeping into her voice. "Doesn't matter if you're a barista or a big-shot lawyer. Rules are rules." She had no idea who he was, or maybe she did and didn't care. Either way, it was refreshing, like a gulp of cold water after a long run. "Lucky for you," she added, grabbing a paper cup. "We never run out of coffee." "Black, no fuss." Liam nodded, surprised she'd guessed his order. "Yeah, how'd you know?" She shrugged, pouring the coffee steam curling up in the cool air. "You look like a no-nonsense kind of guy. Plus, you've got that I haven't slept in 2 days vibe." He chuckled, a real laugh, not the polished one he used in meetings. That obvious, she handed him the cup, their fingers brushing for a split second. Her hands were warm, calloused, no polish, just a simple copper bracelet that caught the light. "Let's just say I've seen my share of tired eyes," she said, already turning to the next customer. Liam stepped aside, cradling the coffee, its heat seeping through the paper. He looked back at her, watching as she bantered with a construction worker, tossing in an extra scone for the road. The world felt slower here, smaller, but not in a way that made him feel trapped. It was the opposite, like he could breathe for the first time in years. He sipped the coffee, bitter and perfect, and let his eyes linger on Emma. She was younger than him, late 20s maybe, but there was a weight to her movements, like she carried something invisible but heavy. He wondered what it was, what kept her here, waking up before dawn to feed strangers from a truck. He didn't ask, though. Not yet. Instead, he thought of a memory, one he hadn't touched in years. He was 12, sitting on the steps of a shelter in Eugene, his stomach growling, his mom gone for days, maybe forever. A girl, maybe a year younger, had sat beside him. Her sneakers scuffed her hair, a messy tangle. She didn't say much, just opened a box of cracked oatmeal cookies and slid half toward him. "You look hungry," she'd said, simple as that. Before she left, she'd torn a piece of paper from a notebook, scribbled something in blue crayon, and pressed it into his hand. "You deserve to be happy," it read. He'd kept that paper tucked in a tin box through foster homes' college boardrooms. He didn't know why he was thinking of it now, but something about Emma, the way she moved, the way she saw people, felt familiar, like a song he hadn't heard in years, but still knew the words to. The line thinned out, and Emma leaned against the counter, catching her breath. She glanced at Liam, still standing off to the side, coffee in hand. "You're lingering," she said, not unkindly, a teasing lilt in her voice. "Waiting for the bagels to magically restock?" He grinned, shaking his head. "Just enjoying the view." It came out smoother than he meant, and he winced internally, expecting her to roll her eyes, but she just laughed, a quick, bright sound. "The view's better with a scone. Trust me, want one on the house since you missed the bagel." He hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, surprise me." She raised an eyebrow like she was sizing him up, then turned to grab a marionberry scone warm from the griddle and slid it into a paper bag. "Don't say I never did anything for you," she said, handing it over. Their hands brushed again, and this time he noticed the way her fingers lingered just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. He took the bag, the warmth of it matching the coffee, and stepped back, feeling oddly lighter, like he'd left something heavy behind in that line. As he walked away, the city waking up around him, he glanced back at moonlit morsels. Emma was already back to work, flipping something on the griddle, her braid swinging as she moved. He didn't know her story, not yet, but he wanted to. He thought of the girl with the cookies again, her quiet kindness, the way she'd looked at him, like he wasn't just another kid in a shelter. Could it be her? The thought was ridiculous, improbable, but it stuck like a pebble in his shoe. He pulled out his phone, not to check emails, but to jot a note. Moonlit morsels, 6:30 a.m. tomorrow. He didn't know why, but he knew he'd be back. Not for the coffee, not for the scone, but for the way this corner made him feel like himself again. Not a CEO, not a headline, just Liam holding a warm paper cup, and a memory he couldn't quite place. Back at the truck, Emma wiped down the counter, her mind half on the orders, half on the guy in the charcoal coat. He wasn't like her usual customers. No paint-splattered jeans, no laptop bag slung over his shoulder, no rush to get to work. He'd stood out not because of his clothes or his tired eyes, but because of the way he'd looked at her, like he was seeing more than just a woman slinging bagels. She shook her head, pushing the thought away. She had enough to worry about her sister Lily, who'd barely left her room since their mom died 2 years ago, the truck's creaky generator, the rent that was always just a little too high. But as she swept crumbs into a bin, she found herself humming again the folk tune her mom used to sing while kneading dough. Maybe it was the spring air or the way the sun hit the truck's silver paint. But for the first time in a long time, Emma felt a flicker of something like hope. She didn't know it yet, but the man with the coffee, the one who'd lingered just a little too long, was about to change everything. The Pearl District was bathed in the soft glow of a Portland afternoon, the kind where the sun peeked through clouds just enough to make the cobblestone streets shimmer. Moonlit Morsels stood at its usual corner of Northwest 10th, and Everett, its silver and blue exterior, catching the light like a quiet beacon. The lunch rush was in full swing, the air thick with the scent of grilled sourdough roasted beets, and Emma Larson's signature lavender-infused lemonade. Inside the truck, Emma moved with a rhythm born of practice, her hands a blur as she assembled a kale and quinoa bowl for a tattooed barista, then slid a smoked salmon sandwich to a delivery driver with a quick extra pickles just for you, Sam. Her auburn braid was slightly frayed from the morning's work, and a smudge of mustard lingered on her denim apron, but her hazel eyes were bright, catching every detail, the way a customer's shoulders slumped, the way another's laugh filled the air. She was 27, but the weight of her life caring for her 15-year-old sister Lily, who battled anxiety and keeping the truck afloat on a shoestring budget, gave her a quiet strength that made her seem older, like she'd already lived 100 mornings like this one. The line was steady, a mix of locals and tourists drawn by the chalkboard sign promising food that feels like home. Emma hummed a snippet of a folk song, her mother's favorite, as she worked the melody weaving through the clatter of spatulas and the low hum of conversation outside. Liam Carter was back, standing at the edge of the line, his charcoal coat swapped for a simple navy jacket, his dark hair tucked under a plain baseball cap. He'd been coming every day for a week now, always ordering the same black coffee, always lingering just long enough to exchange a few words with Emma. He was 32, the CEO of Carter Tech, a company that had redefined cloud computing and made him a billionaire before 30. But here he was, just Liam, a guy with tired eyes and a growing appreciation for the way Emma poured coffee like it was an art form. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another email from his CFO about a potential acquisition, another text from his assistant about a board meeting, but he ignored it, his attention fixed on the truck. There was something about this place, this corner, that felt like a pause button on his life. The world of stock prices and investor calls faded when he was here, replaced by the smell of warm bread and the sound of Emma's laugh, sharp and unguarded, as she teased a customer about their fancy order of plain toast. Today, though, was different. Emma had posted a flyer on the truck's window, handwritten in her loopy script, "Moonlit Morsels Community Night Free Dinner for all 6 p.m." Tonight, the idea had come to her late one night after Lily had a panic attack, and Emma spent hours talking her through it, promising her the world could be kind if you gave it a chance. She'd decided to prove it, to open the truck to anyone who needed a meal, no questions asked. It was a risk. Her savings were thin, and the truck's generator was on its last legs, but it felt right, like something her mom would have done. Liam noticed the flyer as he stepped closer, his curiosity piqued. "Community night," he asked when he reached the window, his voice low but warm. Emma looked up, wiping her hands on her apron, a spark of excitement in her eyes. "Yeah," she said, pouring his coffee without asking. "Figured it's time to give back a little. Food's free tonight, especially for folks who don't always get a warm meal." She nodded toward a group of people sitting on the curb nearby, their clothes worn, their bags heavy with everything they owned. Liam followed her gaze, something tightening in his chest. He knew that life had lived it once, shelters, hunger, the weight of being invisible. "That's generous," he said, taking the coffee. "Need a hand?" The offer slipped out before he could stop it, surprising even himself. Emma raised an eyebrow, sizing him up. "You volunteering? Don't you have like a fancy office to run?" She was teasing, but there was a question in her eyes, like she was trying to figure him out. Liam shrugged, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Office can wait? I'm pretty good at slicing bread, if that counts." She laughed, a sound that made the air feel lighter. "All right, mystery man. Show up at 5:30 and don't be late. I don't care how good you look in that jacket." He grinned, the kind of grin he hadn't used since college, before the world expected him to be perfect. "Deal," he said, stepping aside to let the next customer through. As he sipped his coffee, he watched her work, the way she leaned out to hand a kid a free cookie, the way she remembered names like they were lyrics to her favorite song. He didn't tell her, but he'd already decided to do more than slice bread. That afternoon, he made a quiet call to his assistant, arranging an anonymous donation to cover the cost of tonight's food. He didn't want Emma to know, not yet. He wanted her to see him, not his money. By 5:30, the street was buzzing. Emma had strung fairy lights around the truck, their soft glow mixing with the fading daylight. Tables were set up on the sidewalk, mismatched chairs borrowed from a nearby cafe, and a small crowd was already gathering: families, students, a few regulars, and a handful of people who looked like they hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. Emma was in her element, directing volunteers with a calm authority, her apron swapped for a clean one with a moon embroidered on it. Liam showed up right on time, sleeves rolled up, no jacket, no cap, just a plain t-shirt and jeans. Emma handed him a knife and a loaf of sourdough. "Don't make me regret this," she said, her tone playful, but her eyes watching him closely. He chuckled, slicing the bread with surprising precision. "Not my first time in a kitchen," he said, and for a moment he thought of the shelter in Eugene, the way he'd helped wash dishes to earn an extra bowl of soup. Emma raised an eyebrow, but didn't press, too busy plating sandwiches and pouring lemonade. The night unfolded like a small miracle. People sat together, strangers sharing stories over bowls of roasted vegetable stew and slabs of cornbread. Emma moved through the crowd, refilling cups, laughing with a toddler who'd smeared jam on his face, slipping an extra sandwich to a man in a tattered coat. Liam watched her, his hands busy, but his mind elsewhere, caught in the way she made everyone feel seen. He helped serve, carrying trays, wiping tables, even joining a conversation with a group of college kids about the best hiking trails in Oregon. Every now and then, Emma's eyes met his, and she'd give him a nod like they were in on some unspoken secret. "You're not half bad at this," she said at one point, bumping his shoulder as she passed. "Careful," he shot back. "I might steal your job." She laughed, and he felt something shift inside him, like a door he'd forgotten how to open. As the night wound down, the crowd thinned, leaving just a few stragglers and a pile of dishes. Emma leaned against the truck, her face flushed from the work, her braid loose and messy. "Thanks for sticking around," she said, handing Liam a cup of lemonade. "You didn't have to." He took it, their fingers brushing, and he noticed the copper bracelet again glinting under the fairy lights. "I wanted to," he said simply, and for a moment they just stood there, the city quiet around them. She tilted her head, studying him. "You're not like most of my customers, you know that. Most people don't volunteer on a whim." He shrugged, looking down at his cup. "Maybe I needed a break from my usual." She didn't push, but her eyes lingered like she was trying to read something he wasn't saying. They started cleaning up, stacking chairs, scrubbing pans in the truck's tiny sink. Emma told him about her mom, how she'd taught her to cook with whatever was in the pantry, how moonlit morsels was her way of keeping those recipes alive. "She used to say food is how you tell people they matter." Emma said, her voice softer, now almost lost in the clink of dishes. Liam nodded, his throat tight. "My mom. She wasn't around much," he said, surprising himself. "But I remember someone once telling me I deserved to be happy. Changed how I saw things." He didn't mention the shelter, the cookies, the note, but he wanted to. Emma looked at him, her hands still in the soapy water. "That's a good someone," she said quietly. "Not everyone gets that." For a moment, the air between them felt heavy, not with tension, but with possibility, like they were standing on the edge of something neither could name. The moment broke when Emma's phone buzzed. She dried her hands, frowning as she read the screen. "It's Lily," she said, her voice tightening. "My sister. She gets anxious sometimes. I should check on her." Liam nodded, stepping back. "Go. I'll finish up here." She hesitated, then gave him a small smile. "You're all right, mystery man." She grabbed her bag and headed off, leaving Liam alone in the truck. He finished scrubbing the last pan, the fairy lights still glowing outside, and slipped a folded check into the cash box, an anonymous donation enough to cover the night, and then some. He didn't sign it, didn't leave a note. He just locked up and walked into the night, the taste of lemonade still on his lips. The next morning, he was back, same time, same navy jacket. Emma was already at the window, pouring coffee for a regular. She spotted him and grinned. "You again. I'm starting to think you're obsessed with my coffee." He laughed, taking his usual cup. "It's not bad," he said, his tone light, but his eyes holding hers a little longer. "Plus, I heard there's a community night I can't miss." She rolled her eyes, but her smile stayed. "Don't get cocky. You still owe me for that bread you butchered last night." They bantered like that for days, then weeks, a quiet rhythm forming coffee, small talk, stolen glances. Liam started opening up, telling her about his love for old vinyl records, his failed attempt at gardening, anything but the truth about Carter Tech. Emma shared stories about Lily, how she'd draw for hours when the world felt too loud, how the truck was as much for her as it was for Emma's own dreams. But the truth was creeping closer. One afternoon, as Liam waited in line, his phone rang and he stepped away to answer it. "Yes, the merger's on track," he said, his voice low but sharp, the kind he used in boardrooms. "Tell the team to prep for Singapore." He hung up quickly, but not before Emma caught the tail end, her brow furrowing. "Big shot call?" she asked, half teasing, half curious. He shrugged it off. "Just work." But her eyes lingered, and he knew she was starting to wonder. Later that day, a man in a cheap suit lingered near the truck, snapping photos with his phone, his gaze fixed on Liam. A reporter may be sniffing out a story. Liam's stomach sank. He'd wanted this corner, this feeling to stay untouched. But the world was catching up. He looked at Emma, laughing with a customer, and wondered how long he could keep being just Liam, the guy with the coffee, before she saw the rest. The rain came down in sheets over Portland's Pearl District, turning the cobblestone streets into a mirror of gray clouds and neon reflections. It was late afternoon, the kind of day where the sky seemed to press against the city, heavy and unrelenting. Moonlit morsels stood at its usual corner of Northwest 10th and Everett, its silver and blue paint streaked with water, the chalkboard menu smudged beyond legibility. Inside Emma, Larson worked alone. Her auburn braid tucked under a hood, her denim apron soaked at the edges from a frantic dash to cover the condiment bins. The lunch rush had been slow, the weather keeping most regulars away, but she kept the griddle hot, flipping a single sandwich for a lone customer who'd braved the storm. Her hazel eyes were tired, not just from the long hours, but from the weight of everything else, Lily's latest panic attack, the truck's generator sputtering again, the bills piling up in her tiny apartment. At 27, Emma was used to carrying her world, but today it felt heavier, like the rain was seeping into her bones. She hummed a folk tune softer now, almost drowned out by the patter of drops on the truck's awning, trying to anchor herself in the familiar rhythm of work. Liam Carter stood under a black umbrella, his navy jacket dotted with rain, his dark hair damp at the edges where the wind had caught him. He'd been coming to Moonlit Morsels every day for nearly a month, his mornings starting with Emma's coffee, his evenings ending with her laugh, lingering in his mind. At 32, he was the CEO of Carter Tech, a name synonymous with innovation and wealth. But here, he was still just Liam, the guy who sliced bread badly and stayed too long after community night. He'd grown to love this corner the way it stripped away the noise of his life, boardrooms, headlines, the constant pressure to be more than human. But the cracks were showing. Yesterday, a reporter had lingered too long snapping photos, and Liam had caught a glimpse of a blog post online, "Tech Tycoon Spotted at Local Food Truck, What's He Hiding?" His anonymity was unraveling, and with it, the fragile connection he'd built with Emma. He stepped closer to the truck, the line non-existent today, and watched her wrestle with a folding table, its legs stuck in the mud. "Let me help," he called, his voice cutting through the rain. Emma startled, nearly dropping the table, then turned her hood, falling back, to reveal wet strands of auburn hair clinging to her face. "You again," she said, half smiling, half exasperated. "You're going to catch a cold standing out here." He grinned, gripping the table's other end and helping her collapse it. "Too late for that." They worked quickly, stacking chairs and covering supplies, Liam holding the umbrella over her, even as his own shoulder got soaked. Within minutes, they were under the truck's awning, the rain hammering above them like a drum. Emma shivered, brushing water from her arms, and Liam noticed the copper bracelet on her wrist, glinting faintly despite the gloom. "Thanks," she said, her voice softer now. Most people would have just run for cover. He looked at her, water dripping from his hair, and said quietly, You're not most people." The words hung between them heavier than the rain, and for a moment neither spoke the only sound, the steady rhythm of the storm. Emma broke the silence, leaning against the counter. "You ever feel like the world's trying to tell you something?" she asked, her eyes distant. Liam tilted his head, curious. "Like what?" She shrugged, wrapping her arms around herself. "Like maybe you're running too fast, or not fast enough. I don't know. This truck, Lily, everything, it's all I've got, but sometimes it feels like it's slipping." Her honesty caught him off guard, raw and unguarded, and he wanted to tell her everything about the shelter, the cookies, the note that had kept him going through years of nothing. But before he could, a flash lit up the street, then another. Cameras. A black SUV screeched to a stop, doors flying open as a swarm of reporters spilled out. Microphones, raised phones, flashing. "Mr. Carter." "Liam Carter," a voice shouted. "Is it true you've been hiding out here? What's the deal with the food truck girl?" Emma froze her breath, catching. The coffee pot in her hand slipped, shattering on the pavement, the sound swallowed by the rain and the reporter's clamor. Liam stepped forward, his face hard, hands raised. "Stop!" he said, his voice sharp, the one he used to silence boardrooms. "This is private property. Leave, now." But the crowd pressed closer, a mic shoved toward him. "Are you slumming it for a story, Mr. Carter? Or is this a publicity stunt for Carter Tech?" Emma's eyes widened, her gaze snapping to him. "Carter?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "As in Liam Carter, the tech guy." The name hit her like a slap, every headline she'd ever skimmed flashing through her mind. Billionaire genius, untouchable. She stepped back, her hands shaking, the rain soaking her through. "You're him," she said. Not a question, but a realization sharp with betrayal. "This whole time you were—" "What?" "Playing pretend." Liam's face twisted, desperation in his eyes. "Emma? No, it wasn't like that." She cut him off, her voice rising. "What was it then? You let me think you were just some guy, just Liam. Coffee, community night. All of it was that. A game to you. The reporters ate it up. Cameras, clicking, phones, recording." A woman in a red coat shouted, "Is she your girlfriend, Mr. Carter? How long's this been going on?" Emma's face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with fury. "I'm not anybody's anything," she snapped, turning to Liam. "You lied to me. Every day, every conversation. You lied." Her voice broke on the last word, and she turned away, stepping into the truck, her hands gripping the counter to steady herself. Liam stood frozen, the rain drenching him, the umbrella forgotten at his feet. "Emma, please," he said, barely audible over the storm. "I didn't lie to hurt you. I wanted you to see me, not the headlines." She didn't turn around, her shoulders rigid, her breath uneven. "Well, I see you now," she said, her voice cold, "and I don't like it." The truck's door slammed shut, the sound louder than the thunder overhead. The reporters kept snapping photos, shouting questions, but Liam didn't hear them. All he saw was her back, the way her hands had trembled, the way her eyes had looked at him like he was a stranger. He turned to the crowd, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out of here. Now." They hesitated, then scattered as he stepped forward, his presence enough to push them back. Inside the truck, Emma leaned against the wall, her heart pounding, the smell of coffee and burnt toast suffocating now. She thought of every moment, the way he'd laughed, the way he'd stayed to clean up, the way he'd looked at her like she was more than a food truck girl. It had felt real, but now it felt like a script, a story he'd crafted to amuse himself. She slid to the floor, her knees pulled to her chest, and let the tears come silent and hot, mixing with the rain on her face. Outside, Liam stood alone, the street emptying as the storm raged on. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small tin, dented and worn, and opened it. Inside was a piece of paper yellowed with age, the blue crayon faded, but still legible. "You deserve to be happy." He'd carried it through every chapter of his life, a reminder of the girl who'd seen him when no one else did. And now he was sure it was her Emma, the girl with the cookies, the girl who'd changed everything. But he'd lost her, not because of who he was, but because of what he hadn't said. The next morning, Moonlit Morsels didn't open. The corner was quiet. The truck's awning folded the chalkboard blank. Emma was gone, not just for the day, but gone entirely. She'd packed up the essentials, her mom's recipe book, Lily's sketch pads, a few clothes, and driven to a small town an hour outside Portland, a place called McMinnville, where her aunt had a spare room. She needed space distance, a chance to breathe without the weight of betrayal pressing against her chest. Lily sat in the passenger seat, her headphones on, sketching, silently sensing her sister's pain, but not knowing how to fix it. Emma didn't tell her about Liam, not yet. She just drove the rain, following them like a shadow, her mind replaying every moment she'd thought was real. Back at her apartment, tucked in a drawer, was a letter Liam had slipped through the truck's window that morning, handwritten, his words, careful but raw. "I was 12 at a shelter in Eugene. You gave me cookies, a note, a reason to keep going. I didn't tell you who I was because I wanted you to see me, not my name. I'm sorry. Please, let me explain." She'd found it, but hadn't read past the first line, crumpling it in her fist before tossing it aside. In Portland, Liam sat in his penthouse, the city sprawling below him, all glass and steel and emptiness. His phone was silent. No emails, no calls. His assistant instructed to hold everything. He stared at the tin box, the note inside it, and felt the weight of his own choices. He'd built an empire, a life, but it meant nothing without her. He thought of the shelter, the way she'd sat beside him, not asking questions, just offering half her cookies, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She'd seen him then, and he'd thought she saw him now, but he'd been wrong. He'd hidden too much, assumed too little. He opened his laptop, pulling up a file he'd started weeks ago, a plan to expand Moonlit Morsels, not as a chain, but as a community hub, a place for people like the ones at community night with Emma at the helm. It was a dream he'd wanted to share with her, but now it felt like a plea, a way to show her he wasn't just the headlines. Across town, the reporter who'd broken the story sat in a coffee shop typing furiously. Billionaire's secret food truck romance. The truth behind Liam Carter's double life. The post went viral, comments flooding in, some calling it a stunt, others a fairy tale. Emma's name wasn't mentioned, but the truck was, and that was enough to make her feel exposed, like her world had been turned into someone else's entertainment. She didn't check her phone, didn't want to see the headlines. In McMinnville, she unpacked in her aunt's attic, Lily curled up on a cot sketching a picture of the truck under a starry sky. Emma sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her sister's face, and whispered, "We'll be okay." But her voice cracked, and she wasn't sure she believed it. The rain kept falling, the world kept turning, and somewhere between Portland and McMinnville, a story that had started with cookies and a note was breaking apart, waiting for someone to pick up the pieces. The small town of McMinnville, Oregon, woke to a quiet dawn, the kind where the mist clung to the vineyards and the air smelled of wet grass and distant wood smoke. It had been 3 weeks since Emma Larson had left Portland. Her food truck, Moonlit Morsels, shuttered behind a chain-link fence, its silver and blue paint dulled by dust. She'd settled into her aunt's attic, a cramped space with slanted ceilings and a single window overlooking rolling hills. At 27, Emma was no stranger to starting over, but this felt different, raw like a wound that hadn't scabbed. Her auburn hair was loose, falling over her shoulders, as she sat on the floor, sorting through a box of keepsakes, her mom's recipe cards, Lily's old drawings, a faded photo of them at the beach. Her hazel eyes were heavy, not just from sleepless nights, but from the ache of betrayal that lingered like a bruise. Lily, her 15-year-old sister, was downstairs sketching silently, her anxiety quieter here, but never gone. Emma hadn't opened the letter Liam Carter had left, hadn't checked her phone for the headlines that had turned her life into a spectacle. She'd come here to escape, to protect Lily, to find a way to breathe again. But every morning she woke with the same question: how do you rebuild when trust is the thing that's broken? Liam Carter stood outside a small cafe in McMinnville, his navy jacket swapped for a plain sweater, his dark hair mussed from the drive. At 32, he was used to commanding rooms, but now he felt small, uncertain, clutching a folder with a plan he wasn't sure she'd even look at. The past 3 weeks had been a blur of cancelled meetings and sleepless nights, his penthouse feeling more like a cage than a home. He'd built Carter Tech from nothing, turned a shelter kid's dream into a billion-dollar empire, but none of it mattered without Emma. He'd known it was her, the girl from the Eugene shelter, the one who'd shared her cookies and scribbled, "You deserve to be happy," on a scrap of paper since that first morning at Moonlit Morsels. Her kindness had been a lifeline then, and it was again now, even if she didn't know it. He'd tracked her down through a friend of a friend, not with his wealth, but with persistence, showing up in McMinnville without his driver, without his title, just as Liam, the man who'd fallen in love with her, laugh and her griddle, and the way she made the world feel softer. He knocked on the cafe door, where Emma had taken a part-time job to make ends meet. She was behind the counter pouring coffee for a farmer in overalls, her denim apron back on her braid swinging as she moved. She looked up and her eyes locked on his, shock, giving way to something harder. Anger, maybe? Or hurt? "What are you doing here?" she said, her voice low, sharp enough to cut through the cafe's hum. The farmer glanced between them, grabbed his coffee, and shuffled off. Liam stepped forward, the folder in his hand, his voice steady but soft. "I needed to see you, Emma. To explain." She crossed her arms, her hazel eyes narrowing. "You had a month to explain. You chose to lie instead." He flinched but didn't back down. "I didn't lie about who I am. Not the part that matters. I just didn't tell you the parts that don't." She laughed a bitter sound. "The parts that don't, like being a billionaire, like turning my truck into a tabloid circus." He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "You don't get to show up here and make it okay, Liam." "You don't." He set the folder on the counter, not pushing, just letting it sit. "This isn't an apology," he said. "It's a start. Read it or don't. But I'm not leaving until you hear me out." She stared at the folder, then at him, her jaw tight. The cafe was quiet, the morning rush over, and for a moment they were alone with the weight of their words. She didn't touch the folder, but she didn't walk away either. 5 minutes, she said, finally. "Then you're gone." He nodded, grateful for the chance, and began. "I was 12 at a shelter in Eugene. My dad was gone. My mom was somewhere else. I was starving, not just for food, but for someone to see me. You did. You sat down, gave me half your cookies, wrote that note. You deserve to be happy. I kept it, Emma. It's the only thing I've carried through every home, every city, every deal. When I saw you at Moonlit Morsels, I knew it was you. I didn't tell you who I was because I didn't want you to see a CEO. I wanted you to see me. Emma's breath hitched, her eyes flickering with something memory maybe, or recognition. She remembered the boy, skinny and silent, his hands clenched, like he was holding the world at bay. She'd been 11, just as hungry, just as alone. But she'd had her mom's voice in her head, telling her to share what little she had. She'd written the note on impulse, not knowing it would matter. Now standing in this cafe, she felt the past collide with the present, and it hurt. "You should have told me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You let me think you were someone else." Liam shook his head, his eyes pleading. "I was trying to be someone else, someone who didn't have to be perfect, who didn't have to carry a company or a name. With you, I was just Liam, and I fell in love with you, Emma. Not the truck, not the story, just you." She turned away, her hands gripping the counter, tears stinging her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing, and hers was shattered. "I can't do this," she said, her voice barely audible. "Not now." Liam nodded, his throat tight. "I'll wait," he said, "as long as it takes." He left the folder and walked out the cafe door, jingling behind him. Emma stared at the folder, her fingers itching to open it, but her heart too heavy to try. That night, alone in the attic, she finally did. Inside was a plan not for a corporate takeover, but for Moonlit Morsels to become a non-profit, a network of food trucks, training people experiencing homelessness in culinary skills, with Emma as the founder holding 51% control. At the bottom, in Liam's careful handwriting, was a single line, "You've always given people a reason to keep going. Let me help you do it again." The next week, Emma agreed to meet him not in Portland, but in McMinnville at a community garden where she'd been taking Lily to sketch. Liam showed up, no suit, no pretense, just a thermos of coffee and a nervous smile. They sat on a bench, the air crisp with the scent of lavender and earth. "I don't trust you," she said bluntly, her eyes on the horizon. "But I read your plan. It's good." He nodded, not pushing. "It's your dream, Emma. I just want to help you build it." She looked at him, then really looked, and saw the boy from the shelter. In his eyes, scared, hopeful, real. "No more lies," she said. "Not one." He held her gaze. "Never again." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. They began small, planning a community event in McMinnville to test the idea. Emma reopened Moonlit Morsels for one night, parked in a local park. Fairy lights strung up tables set with her mom's recipes, lavender lemonade, roasted vegetable stew, marionberry scones. Liam was there not as a CEO, but as a volunteer, serving plates, washing dishes, listening as Emma taught a group of unhoused locals how to knead dough. Lily joined too, her sketches turning into menu designs, her quiet confidence growing as she handed out scones. The night was a success, not because of the food, but because of the people, strangers sharing stories, laughing, finding a moment of warmth in a world that often felt cold. Emma watched Liam, the way he listened to a man named Joe talk about losing his job, the way he didn't flinch when a kid spilled lemonade on his shoes. She saw the man, not the headlines, and something in her softened. Weeks turned into months, and trust grew slowly, like a seed breaking through soil. They moved back to Portland, reopening Moonlit Morsels with a new mission, a training program for the unhoused funded by Liam's donation, but led by Emma's vision. The truck became a hub not just for food, but for second chances. Lily started speaking more, her sketches now framed on the truck's walls. One of them, a starry sky, with the words, "You deserve to be happy," in blue ink. One evening, as the sun set over the Pearl District, Liam handed Emma a small box. Inside was a key, not to a car or a house, but to the truck engraved with her mom's name. "Partners?" he asked, his voice shaking. She looked at him, her eyes bright with tears, and something else, hope. "Partners," she said, and pulled him into a hug, her arms tight like she was holding on to home. The wedding was simple, held in a Portland park under cherry blossoms, the new moonlit morsels restaurant, a brick-and-mortar extension of the truck catering the reception. Lily walked Emma down the aisle, her sketchpad tucked under her arm, a smile breaking through her usual quiet. The guests were a mix of regulars, shelter workers, and the people they'd trained, all family, now bound by food and forgiveness. Liam stood at the altar, nervous his tie. Crooked, his best man, a former volunteer from community night, grinning beside him. Emma wore a soft white dress, the engraved key tied with a ribbon around her wrist. When they vowed to be partners in business, in life, in everything, the crowd cheered, and Lily clapped loudest of all. At the reception, a framed note hung on the wall. "You deserve to be happy," beside a new sign, "Moonlit Morsels, a recipe for hope." The lesson wasn't in the headlines, or the wealth, or even the love story. It was in the small things, the cookies shared on a cold step, the coffee poured without judgment, the choice to show up again and again, even when it hurt. Emma and Liam learned that kindness, however small, could ripple outward, changing lives in ways no one could predict. They taught others through the truck, through the program, that everyone deserves a seat at the table, a chance to be seen, a reason to believe in tomorrow. And as the stars rose over Portland, the city humming softly around them, they stood together, knowing the future wasn't just something you built. It was something you shared.